My name is Jessi Oslington. I live in Collie in Western Australia, and I was born in 1955 in England. My earliest recollection was of life itself was pretty violent. With such things, you know, my parents were quite abusive in such things like my father used to tie me up and give me a good bashing, and then make me stand in the corner for hours on end against the wall. And my mother, she used to just sit. She didn't worry her. She used to sit. I recollect one time when she was sitting in the lounge and knitting while my father was tying me up and everything, and he managed to hit me, and I fell over because I couldn't move. My legs were bound, and I cut my chin. And just things like that. And I remember they used to make me sleep on bare floorboards and no pillow, no blankets or anything. And I remember my sister, who was a year younger, Sandra, she used to get out of her bed and share her pillow and blanket with me. And just before Mum and Dad were to wake up, she'd quickly get up and jump into her bed. We came out to Australia in 1961 by boat, by the Fair Sky, and we were only in Australia just for a little bit when my mum decided one morning to grab my hand and say, "Come on, you're coming with me," and she took me to a boys' home in Sydney, in Carlingford. It was a Church of England boys' home, and she just left me in the care of a matron and without a word walked away. So I haven't experienced any family. I've had no mother or father, no sisters, no brothers, no aunties, uncles, grandparents, cousins, whatever. And I was the smallest boy in this of 300 children in this boys' home, and it was a pretty violent place to live. I was always picked on, and I can't remember a day going by when I wasn't in some sort of fight or harassed in some way. The matrons and the superintendent were pretty violent too. Like I remember like being in deep sleeps, and I was reefed out of the bed, and I was beaten and pounded and just bang, 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 all because my locker was a little bit untidy or something like that. I remember the superintendent, if you were really, really naughty or he was in a bad mood, he'd stand you up against a tree and put a can on your head and shoot that can off with the .303. So that was, you know, or it was a pretty violent place to be in. I didn't get anyone coming up to me and saying, "Jessi, I love you. I think you're a really nice fella, and I care about you." And when you don't get a lot of physical touch or emotional positive input, you tend to feel very, very lonely, and you feel like the whole world's against you. And I used to chuck a lot of big tantrums, violent tantrums, and the boys' home put me in forced me to go into a psychiatric centre in Parramatta, and I was locked away for about three weeks in a room full of men. And then when I got out of that the superintendents had changed, and the superintendent said, "Well, no, you don't live here anymore." So I was awarded the state in this boys' home, and I was around about 14, I think, so it was in the early 70s. He said, "You've got to go." So I just had a suitcase. I had no money, no food, no place to go, no job, and it was a church-run, government-sponsored home, and so they illegally asked me to go. And straight across the road there was a circus tent, and the Soul Circus, and it's just amazing how God works in your life, because I went across that road and I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I asked for a job, and the guy that was standing on the door, it was a packed tent, and it was he laughed at me and said, "You've got to be kidding, a skinny, scrawny little fella like you, I can't employ you." And it was a beautiful sunny day, the air was still, and the matinee was on, and this freak wind come out of nowhere and lifted that tent. And this man said, "If you grab that pole, I'll give you a job." And so the first part of my working life was swinging quite a few metres off the ground, hanging onto a pole and watching the audience absolutely panic. But I got a job. I was eating rump steak and I had a bed to sleep in that night. But funnily enough, I knew at a very, very early age that there was a God, and that He was with me and that He was looking after me, because when I was about 6 years old, I hadn't been in the boys' home all that long, and we had chores to do, and I remember I had to sweep the pathways really early in the morning, and it was very cold, and I thought to myself, there's got to be a lot more to life than this. And I had an experience of God saying, "Look, I'm going to look after you. I'm going to be your parent. I'm going to be your father." So I knew God was real right from a very, very early age of 6 years of age. And that home was very, very violent. I remember that I was in there a couple of weeks and I got lost trying to find my way to breakfast. And as punishment, one of the matrons with a paddle, like a wooden paddle, smacked me 10 of the best on the soles of my bare feet, just to let you know just how sympathetic these people were and how violent it was. But anyway, back to the circus. So I had a bed to sleep in, and I worked for them for about 6 months. That was a very violent place too. The owner's son of the circus was regularly beating up all the young people. There was no money in it. It was just $40 a week. It was hard work, very little sleep. So I ended up leaving there and living on the streets in the heart of Sydney. And when you're about, I was then about 15. So when you're about 15, you undoubtedly end up in the wrong crowd. I was running around in gangs and stealing cars and drinking alcohol and smoking drugs and taking pills and in fights and doing all sorts of horrible things. And I was a very, very, very angry boy. I was angry against my parents. I was angry against the boys' home. I was angry against everyone. And funnily enough, I thought to myself, I've still got to eat. What am I going to do? And so I ended up getting a job as a chef, and I managed to get at least one basic meal a day. And I ended up getting, I didn't last long as a chef, I ended up getting the sack. But for the rest of my working life, until recently, I bluffed my way through in hospitality, saying I was a chef when I wasn't a chef, and I managed to earn a living. I had been searching for God all through that time. Like I'd been through when I was on the streets, I was living in a Salvation Army flop house on Pitt Street, or just off Pitt Street in Sydney. So the Salvation Army, a lovely guy by the name of Major Petherbridge, helped me and treated me like a son and helped me an incredible amount. And the Church of Christ. There's all sorts of different types of churches, so I was always searching for God, but could never quite get satisfied with any of them. And somehow God still looked after me in my life. You know, I was a very, very heavy drinker, and I drank a lot of heavy, like bourbon and bottles of bourbon and tequila and vodka and whatever I could get my hands on. I was in the industry, so it was pretty easy. I haven't had a drink for about 25 odd years, because it got to the point where my body had packed it in, and it got to the point where I couldn't even take a sip of a mixed drink without being violently ill. And I really believe God had something to do with that, because he didn't want me turning out like an alcoholic. But I was still taking drugs, I was still smoking and dope and all sorts of things. But I was still going from church to church, and I ended up being a Baptist in about 2004, 2005. I was baptised as a Baptist in Collie, and I was a bit disoriented, a bit upset with the people there. I always feel like an outsider there as well, and the pastor disappointed me quite a lot, because he came and visited me one day and actually lied in my kitchen, and I thought, this is not on, you know, and I gave away Christianity. I thought the only God in my life is going to be the God, the creator of everything that was good. And for 2 years, that's how I lived. And I was swearing, and I was loud, I was violent, I was pretty harsh on my children. I had 3 children by that time, 2 boys and a girl. I was separated. It was not looking good, and God had kept hassling me, and I said, look, in the end I was standing in my kitchen, and I said, look, if you want me, you put someone in front of me, you show me, you show me you want me, you put someone in front of me, you bring an angel, anybody and everything. And we'd been living there for 2 years, and this is how God looks after you again. The house we were beside, was next door to us, was a rental, and that had been rented out, and the owners had come back. And for 2 months they'd been living there, and I found out that they were Seventh-day Adventists. And I'd just been quietly talking to Derek Jones. It was Derek and Rowan Jones, and I over the front fence, and saying, look, if you need it, you know, I'm about to get out into the workforce. My kids are old enough, they're going to school now. I can only work in school hours, but I'd really appreciate it if you needed someone. You could put us on for a couple of days. And lo and behold, that's exactly what he did. And he's a roofer, a roof plumber, and I was up on the roof, and I said, you're a church fella, aren't you? And he went, yep. And we started talking. And that Sabbath night, which was a Friday night, he knocked on my door, and he had his Bible in his hand, and I said, oh, g'day, Derek, and he walks in, straight in, no invite, straight in the door. And we started talking, and everything he said, every single thing he said, and he pointed it out, and it was all scriptural. Funnily enough, I already knew, and it made sense. And even the Sabbath, even though I thought Sunday was the Sabbath, I thought Sunday was the 7th day of the week. So it didn't take long to transcend to the Saturday. And he brought me back to God. That was in 2007. He brought me and my young oldest son up here to camp, and that's where I gave myself to the Lord. I went forward in 2007, and I just absolutely broke apart. I was in tears. I was blubbering mess, and it was the most satisfying, beautiful thing I'd ever gone through. And even though it's been 7 going on 8 years, it's been tough, it's been hard. Derek and Rowan Jones have stuck by me, and how they've stuck by me, I have no idea, because we've gone through a lot. But they are the most beautiful people, and if anyone was showed what it's like to be Christ-like, it's those two. And here I am, just having an opportunity to tell you my story.